Start off the evening with a prayer, so if you would. Eternal God, creator of all, we come tonight thankful for our many blessings, but also asking that you inspire us to live more in accordance with the teachings of your Son, Jesus. We thank you for your presence here and ask you to guide us to a better understanding of your scripture. When I was a prisoner, you visited me. These things we ask in the name of our Savior, Jesus. Amen. Amen. My name's Dean Richardson. I think I tried to introduce myself to people as they came in. So we're here tonight to begin a conversation about prisons, prison life, and life after prison. Please come in. Please come in. Is this open? Yes, it is. Thank you for joining us tonight. We just got started, so thank you. I would like to thank each of you, both you guys that are here and those that are attending via the Zoom event, for both your interest and your presence. We thank you for that tonight. We have a special speaker tonight. We've given each of the attendees here a bio, and we've published that bio through the Zoom event where you guys could actually pre-read about Judge Ash. But before I introduce him, I'd like to thank the entire conference staff here for supporting us in this event. There's some folks I'd really like to thank. Billy is out front still greeting people, but behind you, you'll see Christina and David, and they're the folks who've put together the technology and the media of what we've given you guys to have you be here. So thank you guys. The Prison Reform Task Force, that's kind of the team that several of us here in the room, is a team under the Church and Society Committee, okay? So we report through that stream. We have several members here tonight, so I'd like to give you the names of the entire team, and for you guys that are here, I'd like you to hold your hand up or something as I call your name so everybody can see you. I apologize to the group out there. We're not going to be able to show the internet folks who's attending here tonight. But Dennis Foster is right back here, and thank you, Dennis. Paul Bullis, right over here. But other team members who could not be here tonight are Connie Hageman, Jim Eck, Stephen Harvey, and Gene Barnes, and I am so thankful for this great team. As I introduce Cecil Ash, I'm going to introduce him as a man of a very varied background. Although he has been a legislator, an attorney, an emissary to the UN, and a judge, he is first and foremost a family man. Okay, so he brings a lot of experience, but also that warmth of a family relationship to the discussion tonight. For those of you who have been able to scan his bio, you understand the privilege that it is mine tonight to introduce Cecil Ash. Judge Ash.
Thank you, Dean. One of my favorite, you'll see that I like Gary Larson cartoons. I have it somewhere. I didn't bring it tonight. It shows a dog on a high wire. He's juggling balls and he's riding on a unicycle all on the high wire. And the caption of it is, high above the crowd, Rex had one disturbing thought. He was an old dog, and this was a new trick. And so I'm doing this tonight. Christina was kind enough to show me that I could use my iPhone as the remote. I've never done that before. So you let me know if I get in front of the slide or if things aren't working. I do like Gary Larson's cartoons. This is one of my kids' favorite. You see the gentleman's holding a smoking gun with his two friends there at the campfire. And you see the boots of another fellow with his marshmallow stick. The caption, if you can't read it, is, "You guys are both witnesses. He laughed when my marshmallow caught on fire." And that kind of brings up our subject this evening, the appropriate of sentences and sentencing reform and prison reform. Now, there's a difference between those two, but they impact each other. Obviously, if you have the sentencing brings a lot of people into the prisons, and then prison reform deals with rehabilitating criminals, providing appropriate punishment, and then releasing them back out into the community. So recidivism is a big issue of concern. Now, we in our government takes care of a lot of things, and among the things that we have are things that we notice and things we don't notice. So if you see bad roads, obviously you know that the Department of Transportation, the city street department needs to be notified. If you see this kind of thing, you know there's a problem and it needs to be addressed. If you see long lines, you know either we don't have enough personnel or we don't have an efficient system. And if you see that, if that's in your neighborhood, you know you need to call the city health department or talk to your city councilman. These are all issues that we deal with every day with our government, and they're all in front of us. But the problem with prisons is that all of those people are out of our sight. We don't see them every day. We don't really know. Most of us don't know what's going on in prison. Few people are allowed into prison. Mostly it's just the families and the guards that get to see what's going on inside. Well, the families only get the visitation. And their primary focus is communicating with their family. Now, we have a government that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. That means in our society, we are responsible for a government. We don't have a dictator. Some people might argue that now. Whatever you feel, we don't have a dictator, and we are responsible in our society. So when we take over somebody's life, in my opinion, we become responsible for that life. I mean, this person has to receive whatever punishment was doled out at the sentencing. But they have to be fed, they have to be housed, they have to be taken care of, their medical needs have to be addressed. We just can't take over somebody's life and ignore what's happening to them. And so I think our society really becomes responsible for this. Now, why is that up there? Some of you I know are old enough, as I am, to remember these commercials. On a flight from London to LA in 1973, my appendix ruptured. And so I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, very, very ill, came close to dying. And on the TV was a Geritol commercial. And you may remember this phrase, when you've got your health, you've got just about everything. And so since 1973, I've kept that in mind and tried to do those things that would cause me to be healthy. And but I've come to a different conclusion. About a couple years ago, I got pretty sick after an incident and some food poisoning and stuff, and I was deathly ill. And I started thinking about this phrase, and then I started thinking about all the people I visited in prison. And I've come to a different conclusion, and that is, when you've got your freedom, you've got just about everything. Because when I was sick, I could go to the refrigerator, I could make a doctor's appointment, I could run down to Walgreens and get medication or liquids, whatever I needed. It was no fun being sick, but I had the freedom to do that. And our inmates don't have that. They don't have immediate access to medication or the dispensary or to go to the clinic. They're at the mercy of the corrections officers who oversee their wing of the prison. So I do believe, though, that that is something to remember. Now, let me give you a little bit of background about myself. I assume I was invited because of my experience in being in law and the legislature. When I got my law degree and when I went to law school, I was very excited about the profession, and I wanted to be a prosecutor. That seemed like a noble objective, a noble goal. I wanted to put the bad guys in jail, and there's plenty of bad guys out there. And so I thought it would be great to be a prosecutor. The only problem was in about 1990, only the public defender was hiring people. And so reluctantly, I went with the public defender's office. Turned out to be a blessing to me because I really enjoyed it. And I found out that it's, in my opinion, notwithstanding the reputation maybe, but in my opinion, it's a very noble profession. I used to have friends say, well, how can you represent all these criminals? They've done such tremendous harm to people. And my attitude was, you're either representing an innocent man or else you're representing the Constitution of the United States. And both of those are very noble objectives. So the thing I learned, though, is obviously not everybody is guilty who comes through this system. Any of you know who this gentleman is? His name is Ray Crone. He was known as this snaggletooth killer. He was convicted of killing a barmaid where he frequented, and he was convicted on the testimony of a dentist that identified bite marks on the corpse as having come from his bite. And he served 10 years in Arizona in prison. He was 2 years on death row, and ultimately was exonerated by DNA evidence. The DNA evidence not only exonerated him, it found the true murderer, who was also in prison at the time, I believe. And there was a perfect match on the DNA. But he spent 10 years out of his life. I think he got a judgment from the state for $1.4 million for his wrongful conviction. There was some prosecutorial misconduct in there, but that's another issue. Get into another time. Anyway, when I was elected to the legislature, elected in 2008, went down there in 2009. We all remember what happened to, I know you're old enough to remember what happened in 2008. We were facing a huge problem in the state. We had a great deficit. In fact, it was 3.5 billion in the red at the time. So it was important for me, and what I'd run on was trying to fix the budget deficit, among other things. And the first thing I started looking at was, well, where can we save some money? We've got a lot of major programs. We've got to cut somewhere. So where do we start saving? So I looked at the 5 largest expenditures in the state. They were first, K through 12, spent $4.2 billion. Access was $1.7 billion. The Department of Economic Security spent $1.3 billion. And the Department of Corrections was $1 billion. And then just for informational purposes, the Department of Health Services was $684 million. So I thought, well, we've got the area that I know about is criminal law, because I practiced in that area. And so I thought it made sense to look at where we could cut. We have 10, at the time there were 10 locations, 10 sites of prison complexes in Arizona, plus 5 private prison yards. And so we had $1 billion into, at the time, around 40,000 inmates. That was more than $25,000 per inmate in cost to the state. You could almost send someone, and that's, by the way, that's per year. You could almost send someone to college for that kind of money. And so the county attorneys file thousands of cases, or they receive thousands of cases, and then they choose the ones they can win, and those are the ones they file. If they don't think there's a prospect of winning the case, obviously they're not going to file it. Now, the United States has become the world's largest jailer. We incarcerate more people than any other nation. And this is, you can see some of the prominent countries, larger countries there. If you look at the top 20 incarcerators per 100,000 of national population, the United States is way out in front. We're still in front of Cuba and Russia, Panama. Everybody lags behind the United States in this area. Looking at the other Western democracies, the United States, you can see, is way ahead of the other countries from whom we have had most of our immigration in the early part of our country. It's a very disproportionate amount of incarceration in the United States, obviously. Now, I began looking at Arizona, and Arizona ranks number 5 in terms of incarcerating, and the United States were number 1 west of the Mississippi. And I thought, well, you know, California obviously has more inmates, Texas has more inmates, but they have larger populations. So I looked at the states that are closest to Arizona in population, and you can see them there: Indiana, Massachusetts, and Washington. And I thought, well, what's happening in their states? And those are the figures of the inmates in those states. And you wonder why a state like Washington, which has a larger population than we do, has less than half the inmates. And by the way, in our 42,000, only 4,600 of those are criminal aliens. So it's not just the fact that we live next to the border that causes these large numbers for us. It has more to do with what's going on in our criminal justice system. So let me tell you about my first case as a public defender. I received the file and looked through it, and here's about a 29-year-old young Hispanic guy that had gone into a Fry's supermarket and attempted to shoplift a carton of Marlboro cigarettes. And he was on video. So, and they caught him just outside the door with no receipt and the carton of cigarettes. So I don't think even Perry Mason could have gotten him off. I didn't feel like I could. So he stole his cigarettes. What's the appropriate sentence? What would be the appropriate punishment for that kind of a thing? $16.98. How about a week in jail and a $500 fine? Maybe a year in prison plus 5 years probation. How about 10 years in prison? Well, my plea offer from the prosecutor, initial plea offer, was 10 years in prison. He felt like he was doing me a favor because had he gone to trial and lost, which I think he would have, the sentence would have been 10 and a half years. Now you say, why on this kind of a case? Shoplifting can be charged as theft, a class 4 felony. I think it's actually classified under burglary. Or it can be charged as a class 1 misdemeanor, shoplifting. Well, in his case, he had 2 prior felonies, drug-related offenses. And so they chose to charge it as burglary in a commercial establishment. In other words, his 3rd felony. So had he gone to trial, he would have 2 prior felonies, and the sentencing range was 8 years to 10 and a half years. So he thought that was an unreasonable plea offer, obviously. And I had to explain the law to him, and in his case, he decided to accept the sentence and took 8 years in prison. Is it worth $23,000 a year to have someone for that kind of offense serve this amount of time? Well, this is one reason that America incarcerates too many people. We have these laws that require such harsh penalties. A lot of people are accepting those penalties because they enter into plea agreements, because to not enter into a plea agreement may result in more time. And you'll see from this, I apologize, it's not very clear. In the 1980s and 90s, something happened at that time in our country to greatly increase prison jail populations. And what was that?
Truth in sentencing.
Truth in sentencing, mandatory sentencing, 3 strikes and you're out, war on crime, on drugs. All of these things combined at about that time. And we no longer have the relatively simple life that we had prior to the 1980s. So when I got to the legislature, I realized, well, this is an opportunity for me. I'd never planned on being in the legislature, really, never thought of running for office. But once I got there, I got there in 2009, and the last time I had practiced law was in 1995, when I left the public defender's office to work on the family business. But I started realizing, gee, I know something about the criminal law. Maybe I can do something here. And so I went to Kirk Adams, who was at the time Speaker of the House, He's currently I think the chief of staff to Governor Ducey. But at the time I told Speaker Adams, this is something I would like to do. Let's have an ad hoc sentencing reform committee. And we'll hold some hearings and see what we can glean from our citizens of what's either good or bad in the criminal justice system. So we began holding hearings over the next year. We had a number of hearings. We just invited the public to come and express whatever views they wanted in front of the committee. And we heard from a lot of people, and we found out there was a lot going on in the prisons and in sentencing in general that, in my view, just didn't make sense. Now, we had some opposition. One of the main lobbies against sentencing reform is what's called APAC, the Arizona Prosecuting Attorneys Advisory Council. And that's a group that consists of all of the county attorneys in each of the 15 counties in Arizona. And they meet regularly. They have a full-time lobbyist at the legislature who's there every day advocating for laws and procedures that really help them to prosecute people. And so they were against some of the things that we were talking about and some of the comments that had been advocated in front of our legislative committee. So that was part of the opposition. The other part was all those legislators who had run on a stance of tough on crime. No one ever runs on the motto soft on crime. They don't get elected because we all want to. None of us like crime, so there's no constituency for being soft on crime. And so those legislators that had run on that platform advocated that. Well, this is another one of my Gary Larson cartoons. You can tell I'm writing, "This is a legislature full of horses," and the caption is, "The entire parliament fell dead silent for the first time since anyone could remember. One of the members voted aye." My wife didn't get it. I had to explain that they usually vote nay. And that's kind of the predicament I found myself in, because for whatever reasons, I wasn't really worried about being elected. In fact, the first 2 years I was there, some of the people would come in and say, "Well, how do you like being in the legislature?" And I would say, it is great to be paid for something you would do for free. Even though it's only $24,000 a year, I thought, well, I would be doing this if there were no salary. So that was the first 2 years. The second 2 years, I was chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. And I told my wife, they can't pay me enough to do this job. So I didn't anticipate doing a third term. And the other reason I didn't want to do it is because I'll tell you in a minute, I didn't feel like I was making any progress in this area. So in any event, and this also reminds me of the story about the guy who stayed out late at night and was coming home from the bar, and his wife called him and said, "Dear, be very careful. The radio says there's some nut on the freeway going the wrong way." And he says, "One nut? There's hundreds of them." I found myself going against the grain on this. And it's interesting because some people would tell you, "Hey, Ash, I really support what you're doing." And then when it came to a vote on the House, a lot of them would come and say, "Oh, I got a lot of emails from my constituents. They don't want me to support this. They don't think I'm soft on crime." So that was kind of what happened. So we look at what's happening in our crime, and the sharp increase came because of mandatory sentencing. These laws give a range of sentences for the judges to and prosecutors to deal with for any particular given crime. And that's what it did, is basically it took away discretion from the judges. Now, before the criminal code we have now that set up these mandatory sentences, it was enacted in 1978. They had indeterminate sentencing. In other words, a judge could give out whatever sentence they thought was appropriate. So you had disparate sentencing. You might, if someone shoplifted a carton of cigarettes, he might receive 5 years in Phoenix, and he might receive 30 days in jail in Cochise County. And so it was a a reasonable objective, and still is, I think, in some respects, to kind of specify the range of sentences for a particular given crime. The problem, one of the problems I have with that is I would like to know now who decided that for forgery, for example, the range should be 4 to 7 years. Is 4 too few? Is 7 too much? Would 2 years be enough for a forgery case? I mean, 2 years out of your life is a long time. And somebody made that determination, but we don't have any research supporting this kind of determination. So the other thing that happened is it made people really take a big risk to go to trial once mandatory sentencing was enacted. Because you might, and I always tell people who come into my court right before the trial, I always say, there's an old saying in the law that a poor settlement is better than a good lawsuit. And I tell them, when you leave it up to a judge or jury, it's like rolling the dice, because you don't know what what we're going to decide. Many times, I don't know what I'm going to decide. Sometimes after I hear all the evidence, I don't know what to decide. I have to think about it for a few days. Ask my wife what she thinks. She tells me what to decide. Sometimes you just have to think about it. So you take a big risk to go to trial when the consequences are so severe. And juries are not allowed to know what the range of sentences is. Now, if you're considering someone for a particular crime and you think the punishment is 6 months, you might rule differently than if you know that the punishment is life imprisonment. The state may have a good case and you think, well, they proved their case. But I think you'd look at it more closely if you know what the consequences are. And juries are not allowed to know the range of sentences. Yeah, what does that mean? You probably don't know this gentleman. His name is Robert Flabat, and he was a 73-year-old man in Payson. And he had been a school teacher for 25 years, retired, and went into real estate and served on the Payson Planning and Zoning Board. He was active in the community and trying to be an involved member. He had a computer, unfortunately, on which he had some child pornography. And so he was found guilty on 9 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor. Now, to me, sexual exploitation, when I hear that, I think of somebody who's molested a child or had done something wrong. I don't want to ever give the impression that I condone child pornography. It's a despicable and depraved thing. He wasn't the only one who had access to his computer. But it was his computer. He was responsible for it. Now, one thing that always worries me is the very smart child pornographers who are adept with their computers can actually place the child pornography that they want to view on someone else's computer. I've heard about this being done at seminars and workshops where the speakers challenge someone to offer their computer to be hacked into it. The people who understand these things, and like I said, I'm an old dog, so that's a new trick for me. They know how to do that kind of thing. But assuming that he was guilty, each picture is 1 count. Now, none of these people have 1 picture. You know that. There's a gentleman named Morton Berger. It's the premier case in Arizona. He was convicted of 20 counts. He was a school teacher at Glendale High School, had been nominated for Teacher of the Year. He was a student council advisor. No allegations of any kind of solicitation, same way with Mr. Flabat. Mr. Flabat had 2 daughters and some grandchildren. No allegations that anything inappropriate had ever been done with any of them. And Martin Berger, there was no allegations. He collected all kinds of things, and among the things he collected was child pornography pictures. And the police knocked on his door, and he, not knowing what the law was, let them come in and let them talk and showed him what he had. He felt guilty about it. He didn't realize that he would get a sentence of 200 years. So for him and for Mr. Flabat, who is who was 73 years old at the time. When it came time to sentencing, the judge looked at the pre-sentence report that he gets, says he's never had it so much as a parking ticket. He's been a good person in the community, contributor. But he said, so I would give you probation. But the legislatures basically tied my hands in this case. And so Mr. Flavat got a 90-year sentence. And is currently, he's served about 2011, so he's in his 6th year of his 90-year sentence. He will die in prison. Now, again, I'm not trying to condone child pornography. I'm just going back to my first slide. What's the appropriate penalty for that? And are there other alternatives? Could we look at maybe a law that required him to go on probation and pay a fine of $20,000 or never use a computer again? Sometimes I wish I would get that sentence. But, you know, that's a great inconvenience in today's world. But it seems to me that would be a sentence tailored to his particular problem. He was otherwise great, and his family has fought hard to try and get him released, but it hasn't happened. We're supposed to have a system of checks and balances in our government. You know that. We have the legislative branch that makes the laws, the executive branch enforces the laws, and the judges interpret the laws and apply the laws. Before my afternoon calendars at court, I frequently ask some historical question like what's the name of the document that freed the slaves? Or there for a while I was answering, what are the 3 branches of government? I have a courtroom full of people, and some days nobody could answer that question, which is a real. One guy raised his hand and he said, legislative, executive, and he couldn't think of it. I thought this is ironic. Anyway, it's supposed to work like that, where it's a division of power and a system of checks and balances. But when the prosecutor becomes the judge and the jury, then that interferes with the system, doesn't it? And the reason I say that is because it's all in how you charge someone in today's world. And they usually charge it in such a way as to get them a plea agreement, because it saves the trouble of going to trial. It's less work, but it also, in many cases, takes away the right to trial. It's supposed to be a trial in front of your peers. It's supposed to be a part of our rights under our Constitution. And so it used to be that the judges could take all these things into consideration. And this is what I advocated with the legislature. We sit there in the House of Representatives or the Senate, and we pass these laws that are supposed to apply to everybody. And the problem is, everybody's not the same. Is a person old or young, rich or poor? Do they come from a bad home environment or a good home environment? Does that change the culpability? Are they educated or ignorant? Are they a leader or follower? And what's their previous criminal history? Everybody's different. And a judge can look at that and evaluate that. And hopefully we trust them to make that decision. But sometimes you have a 25-year-old prosecutor making the decision instead of an experienced judge who has had, and I think life experiences are very important when it comes to the criminal law system. When you're young, obviously, we all thought differently when we were 25 than we do when we're 50 and 60. So should an immature 18-year-old boy engaged in sexual exploitation with consenting neighborhood boys be treated the same as a 45-year-old man jumping out from behind a bush and grabbing a young girl on her way to school? Those offenses are charged under the same statute. And the prosecutor can demand just about what he wants. I watched this, a young Mexican national who had come up here on somewhat of a vacation. And he was immature. He just turned 18. And he and some other boys in the neighborhood had gotten involved with some what amounted to mutual masturbation. Well, they were 14 and 15. And he was 18. And when I went into the courtroom and I saw 2 people that I knew from the community sitting in the back of the courtroom who had gone to that church. where these all boys went. And I chatted with them and said, "Why are you here?" And they told me about this case. And they said, "The sad thing is, this kid's just a follower. He's immature. The real instigators are a couple of 15-year-olds in the neighborhood that are just kind of out of control." But he had to take a plea agreement of 10 years because he could have gotten 2 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor, which would have amounted to 70 years because they had to be served consecutively. So, but even then, Mr. Flabat, not having personally molested anybody, got a longer prison sentence. In fact, his is longer than many people who are charged with rape, which is usually 33 or 35 years now. So anyway, judges need the ability to exercise their discretion. So what I did after we had this sentencing reform committee is we formed a work group of selected people, prosecutors, defense attorneys, victim rights advocates, inmate representatives, people from the Department of Corrections, members of the public, and we started devising or collecting the information we'd had in our public hearings and saying what needs to be changed in the criminal code that we have now to relieve us of some of these problems. Well, I ran into a roadblock. Many of you may know Ron Gould. He was a senator from Lake Havasu, and he was a Senate Judiciary Committee chairman. I think 4 years ago, I think he ran for Congress, so he left the Senate Judiciary chairmanship. Now, in the legislature, when a bill is dropped, the speaker assigns it to committee, and various committees have various responsibility. Anything that has to do with the criminal code has to go through the Judiciary Committee. And it only goes through the Judiciary, and this applies to all the committees. A bill only goes through the committee if the chair of the committee wants it to. And if the chairman is going to hold the bill, there's very little that you can do to get a bill through. And so what surprised me about Mr. Gould, who I had never met, is I read an article in the newspaper one morning that said, Senator Gould says that prison reform is not going to be an issue this year because he's not going to hear any of Ash's bills. And I thought, are you serious? But we haven't drafted any bills yet. How does he know what we're going to be trying to do? And but he was serious. I went over and talked to him, and I said, how can you reject something you haven't even seen? Well, I don't want to be soft on crime, and we need our crime rate is down because our penalties are harsh. And the truth is, and I can tell you, having represented hundreds of defendants, they don't know whether the penalties are harsh or not until they get the plea agreement and they talk to their attorney, and then they think, oh, wow, I didn't realize I was in this much trouble. So he was one roadblock. And then we had Eddie Farnsworth, who I was vice chair of the Judiciary the first 2 years. And then the second 2 years, normally you would become chair of the committee you were vice chair of and my chairman moved over to the Senate, Adam Driggs. But Eddie had previously been in the legislature and served 6 years as chair of the Judiciary. So they made him chair of the Judiciary, I believe. I don't know for sure, but I believe that the leadership in the House didn't want me messing around with sentencing reform. And so I filed the first year 13 bills, and Mr. Farnsworth would not hear any of them. And the second year that he was in, I filed 10 bills, and he did hear one. And it passed unanimously because a retired justice, Michael, I can't think of his name, but he had retired. He came and testified in favor of the bill, and it passed, but then it went to the Rules Committee. All the bills have to go through the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee chairman wouldn't hear the bill. So I was blocked both years, and that's why I say I got a little bit frustrated by the efforts. They felt that I was being soft on crime, and that's not the case at all. We can be smart on crime, and there's plenty of states that are cutting their prison populations and taking alternative routes to just warehousing people in the state prison. I used to have an argument with Bill Montgomery about our prison population. He said, oh, it's going down, and it went down. My first term, it went from like 40,000 to 39,500. Of course, now it's back up to over 42,500. So we're still incarcerating an awful lot of people. We're putting our heads in the sand on this because we're wasting money. And worse than that, we're wasting people's lives. We could do so much more with our prison system if we would look again at these issues. We have a code that was enacted before the pandemic of drug abuse and addiction. 1978, there was drug use then, but it's not as bad as it is now. And it was before the internet and all the crimes that come along with the internet and all that. And I go back to this child pornography. I remember when I was young, if you wanted to have a dirty magazine, you had to go to the drugstore where I grew up, Hayden, Arizona. It was behind the counter, and we were going to give one. We had a teacher that always referred to Playboy, and so we were going to give him one. We were going to cut out all the pictures and give it to him. So my friends and I had to decide who was going to pick it up, and they voted me. And so I tried to sneak into the drugstore and quietly ask for the lady behind the counter because she knew the other guy. She didn't really know me that well. And I said, I'd like a Playboy magazine. She said, okay, one Playboy coming right up. And everybody in the drugstore knew that I was the guy buying the Playboy. Anyway, if you wanted child pornography, you had to go down to South Phoenix or South Tucson to some, place with no windows on it and really go out of your way to access it. And now you can do it with a click of the mouse in the privacy of your own home. And I just feel like the culpability involved there. And I have no sympathy for those who develop it and who sell it and who distribute it anywhere, who create it. I think these harsh penalties are really appropriate. But when you get somebody like Mr. Flavat, I think 5 years is plenty for that kind of a crime. Some people disagree with me, but I think there at least ought to be a discussion, not only about that, but about all the other sense. Like I said, how much incarceration does it take to have someone change their behavior? And I just feel like we need to look at that and other alternatives to incarceration that might be more meaningful. So here's some, I have 6 suggestions. I had more than that, but I limit them to 6. First of all, we had a bill that would have given judges more discretion to deviate from the mandatory sentences when justice or the state's interests require it. Judges if you go to a judicial conference, judges feel like their hands are tied in many instances. They're kept from doing what they would otherwise do in very many cases. Their hands are tied. The second, and this is one of the real important ones, is to create a legislative sentencing advisory committee. Now, this was the one bill that Representative Farnsworth heard that passed unanimously because Michael Ryan was the Supreme Court judge's name, who had retired. He came and testified. He says, I have long believed that we should have some kind of committee. So my bill had prosecutors, defense attorneys, and law school professors of criminal law. The reason I put them academics in there is they have interns who can do research all around the country. You can look at Missouri and see what Missouri is a very conservative state, but they have enacted a number of changes in their code to address the laws, their current situation. Why does Massachusetts have only 11,000 inmates and they have a similar population to us? We need to be looking at these issues. Well, by having a sentencing advisory committee, it kind of takes the responsibility off the legislature of being accused of being soft on crime. He can say, well, look, this is what's recommended. And the committee was only advisory. It wasn't compulsory to change the laws according to their recommendations. It would at least give the information to the legislators. The truth is, we have a lay legislator. We have teachers in there who know about education. They know nothing about the criminal law. We have farmers who know about water rights and land usage. They know a lot about that, but they don't know about the criminal law. The only ones who really find out about the criminal law are defense attorneys and legislators who get caught committing crimes. And then it's too late for them to vote and change the system. But this would have helped a lot, because you just don't have time. When you have 1,100 bills dropped and you're looking at all the different, taxes and health and human services and all these things, you don't have time on your own to do the research. So I thought this made a lot of sense. But
so who would either appoint, or how would that occur?
Well, I had the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House appoint people from law schools, defense attorneys. You could get some county attorneys on it, some defense attorneys, public defenders, private attorneys. There's really not the prosecutors have a lobbyist there every day. The defense attorneys don't have them. It's really against their interest, because if someone comes in and they're facing 35 years, they're going to pay a lot of money to the defense attorney. So they're not really there. The public defenders are, because they're salaried. They're more inclined, and they have some good people at the public defender's office. So the speaker and the president would appoint the members of the committee, and they would just be advisory. That's all, just people with the willingness and the time to look at what's happening around the country and make the changes. Place the power of clemency solely with the Board of Executive Clemency. Have any of you heard of Mr. McCumber? Mr. McCumber was accused of a murder that occurred, I believe it was in 1968. 2 kids out parked somewhere were shot. They were parked in a car, they were killed, and there was no leads in the case for about 8 years. Mr. McCumber was going through a divorce proceeding with his wife and fighting for child custody of their children. His wife worked in the sheriff's evidence department, and miraculously they found fingerprints of Mr. McCumber's 8 years later on the door, allegedly the door of the car or something like that. So he was convicted. Another man, I don't remember his name. It was something like Cardoza or something like that. He was a Hispanic fellow who had been charged with another crime in another place. But this other gentleman confessed to this murder to his attorney. But because of the attorney-client privilege, the attorney couldn't say anything about it. But he said, I've represented thousands of clients in my time. There's only been 2 that I've been afraid of, and this guy was one of them. And this guy was convicted of this other crime, and then he appealed the case, and he confessed to his appellate attorney that he had committed the crime of which Mr. McCumber was serving time on. He served 35 years and went before the Board of Executive Clemency, and Governor Brewer denied it. And it was a political decision. Everybody the Board of Executive Clemency voted 5-0 to grant him clemency. She not only denied clemency, she let all the board go and replaced all the members of the board. And in my opinion, there will be some that disagree with me. And most of these issues, there's 2 sides to most issues. But there are many people who think we need a public official who's accountable to the voters. The problem I have is they're accountable because it's very political now. It used to be that the clemency was granted relatively frequent after someone had showed their progress in prison and that they had made efforts towards rehabilitation. Now the only people getting clemency, when you see it, is someone who's really incapacitated physically, or who's facing a fatal disease and has a short time to live. A few of those are being granted clemency. So that's my second suggestion.
He ultimately, though, he was released.
Ultimately, Mr. McCumber was released. He went up and lived in Colorado with his son and molested a granddaughter and went back into prison and died in prison. Personally, I think he probably wanted to go back because that was the only life he knew. Sometimes the inmates get out, can't cope with life on the outside. Sue Ellen, a friend of Sue Ellen Allen, some of you know her, she says when she gets inmates out of prison, takes the story I like is she took him to a McDonald's. The guy orders a hamburger and a Coke, and they give him an empty glass or an empty cup. And he says, what's going on here? I ordered Coke and they're giving me this empty cup. You know, they didn't have self-service drinks when he went into prison. So he gets real upset because he thinks they're trying to, you know, mess with him. Anyway, I would allow jurors to know the range of punishments. They don't need to know exactly what the judge is going to give them, but they ought to know the range. And I think in the case of Mr. Flabat, had they known if you convict this gentleman of the charges, he will die in prison. And 90 years is excessive. And I think they would have, and I've seen juries, if it's and I feel the same way, you know, if I know someone's facing 6 months in jail, if I think that's a likely penalty, I will look at it a little more seriously than if it's a $250 fine. It just makes a difference. I think that would keep us all a little more honest. A Citizens Oversight Committee on the Department of Corrections. This is really necessary. And you will never get the agreement, obviously, of the Department of Corrections on this. But when I was in the legislature, because the inmates had heard that I was advocating for some reform in this area, I would get between 12 and 24 letters a month. And I wondered, since I left, who's getting those letters? Because some of those cases are really serious cases. I always remember a lady who started out with a little growth on her chin, on her neck, about the size of a marble. And she tried to get medical help. And by the time it was the size of an orange, it was inoperable. And you know, that's a complaint that needs to be addressed, that kind of thing. Medical attention in the prisons is such a disaster. And like I say, if you've got your freedom, you can go to the doctor. But every time I get sick, I get up and I think, you know, what would I do if I were in a cell? I would be truly miserable. So if we could enact that would and give them some authority to address the issues, that would keep the folks at the Department of Corrections a little more on their toes. And the last thing I advocate, and there's a difference in opinion of this, is I don't like the idea of private prisons. And you know, my political philosophy is I'm a conservative. I'm certainly a fiscal conservative. I'm a social conservative too, for that matter. But fiscally, we want to reduce our expenses on a state level. So the legislature has come up with this idea, well, let's farm this out. But to me, the purpose of prisons is not to save money. The purpose of prisons is to, number one, administer whatever punishment is appropriate, and the least amount to get a person rehabilitated. And that necessarily costs some money to do that. So when you have a private prison, if you're in business, what are your two objectives? You get more customers and reduce your costs. And both of those, in my mind, are antithetical to the idea of government prisons. If all of society melted down, regardless of what you believe about all the other programs that we have, the first two things you would establish, well, maybe first you'd have to have a legislature, I suppose, again, or some governing body. But then you would have a police force and a prison or jail system. Those are two of the most legitimate government responsibilities. And it's not appropriate to send these people and just warehouse them for however amount of time they are, and then release them on the streets with $100 in their pocket and say, good luck. One of the things I did at the legislature my first year there is I went over to see how many professions can you not get a license for in Arizona if you have a felony in your background. And there's 27, among them being a barber. I don't know what the relationship is there. But if you have a felony in your background, there are 27 professions that you don't have access to. And what are they doing in private prisons? They're taking first of all, they just signed a new contract where they guarantee 100% occupancy, the private prisons. And the private prisons only take the minimum security people. They don't take the hard cases. They don't take people that are threatening. It's not an equal share of the burden. Our benefit is we get their buildings after 20 years. We get the facilities. They become state property. What condition they'll be in then, who knows? But it just seems to me that those two objectives of a business don't coincide with the state's interest here. So those are six suggestions I have. There are others that we could come up with, and you probably have come up with them. It's time for a change. What could you do? The only thing I know is it's going to require leadership. You can call your state legislators, tell them this is an important issue. You want them to be smart on crime and not soft on crime. And you want them to look at this again. Done. And maybe we can get something done. I'm not real optimistic. We have a chair of the Senate Judiciary, I think now, Judy Burgess, who's very conservative, but I think she's willing to look at some of these things. Eddie Farnsworth terms out after this session, and so there will be a new judiciary chair after this legislative session. We'll see who that is over the judiciary at that time. So thank you for having me here, and if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I'd be happy to address them. Yes, sir.
Who in the judicial system, who makes the decision whether the sentencing will be concurrent or consecutive?
Okay, the question, in case you didn't hear it, is who in the judicial system makes the decision whether sentences will be concurrent or consecutive? And basically it's the legislature. They've established that certain sex crimes, a number of them, the serious ones, have to be consecutive sentences. The judge doesn't have a choice. There are some other sentences, areas where there is a choice and it's up to the judge. He can designate them either concurrent, to be served concurrently or consecutively. But the real serious crimes are generally stipulated in the statute to be consecutive. And sometimes it depends how they're charged. If it's there are previous felonies and they allege them, or they make an allegation of dangerousness, there's certain ways to charge them that determine what the judge has to do. That's kind of what concerns me. A lot of power is given to the prosecutors in the way offenses are charged. Yes, sir.
Would you support the judiciary being the one to make that decision?
Yeah, that's what one of the bills I had was to give the judges discretion on whether it should be consecutive or concurrent on all cases. They have it now in a few areas. But I think in Mr. Flavat's case, for example, the judge, the minimum would have been had them be concurrently served. Yes, Billy?
Judge Ash, I'm with you 99.5% of the way, and our difference would be on Mr. Flavat. And part of that is because children are involved and also human trafficking. You know, a child does not volunteer for those pictures or those videos, etc. But on the other hand, you know, what are your feelings in terms of, is prison a deterrent to others who may be contemplating the same? And because part of this, it's a very personal case to the Desert Southwest Conference right now. We know of someone within our realm that is facing charges at this time for this.
We heard testimony in our committee by one of the ASU law professors who had the research, and her position was, or her statement to the court, to the committee was, what deters crime is not the severity of the punishment; it's the person's perception of the likelihood of getting caught. And most of them don't know what the punishment is. But if they think they're going to get caught, they don't commit the crime. If they think they can get away with it, then they do commit the crime.
So we were told, and I've actually been involved in two cases on this on a professional level, and we were told that as a person begins with frequency to look at child pornography, based on the fact that, it doesn't, your first porn picture is not a child porn. It starts out somewhere else, boredom. You end with child pornography, of which 85% of people who view, according to Pornland, which is a research book on this, 85% who view child porn then at some point may in fact go on to abuse a child. And so, with that, why isn't there a wider, what we were told is that the government starts tracking your computer, that it will automatically be flagged, and that by the time they arrest somebody, this case is done. They know you've got them, they know the whole thing. Why isn't that greater publicized that, you're being tracked, the sentences are severe, this is an addiction, you recognize that it's an illness, get help.
You're asking me why it isn't more widely advertised?
No. Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody is willing to spend the money to do it. They are easy cases, relatively easy cases to prove. And there are a lot of crimes for which there are harsh penalties. We hear these public service announcements about drugs, or we used to. I haven't heard any lately. But, I can't envision an advertisement relating to child pornography being on the air. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to me like you could find somebody who could communicate that. And of course, the people who do it aren't aware of the laws. That's just my experience. Just like Mr. Berger, if he knew he was facing 200 years, he would have never invited the officers in willingly and showed him his computer. And he collected things like spoons and miniature elephants. There were something like 20 items. So I went down to prison and visited him. By the way, I just want to say something about him. Whatever happened in his household was, whatever happened, he has wonderful kids. I've met a couple of them. They're very good kids. They rotate visiting him every weekend. And I just thought he had an outstanding family. So I don't know anybody's background in that regard, only from my experience. You're in good company. My wife disagrees with me too. So, but that's debate it. And my point is, I just think it's a different world now than it used to be, because I know I have 4 boys, and they've all seen pornography. They've all talked to me about it. They feel bad about it. And they're good kids. They're all doing well with professionally. They're all responsible. They want to be good, but it's hard not to see it on the computer at some point in time. And I just feel like the culpability of clicking in your own home is different, way different than those who create it, who make it. You have beheadings. I've never seen a beheading on the internet, but I know it. I understand it's there. I have no desire to see it. We live in a different world now. And my fear is that someone I love, if not my sons, maybe my grandson, somebody is going to encounter that. And pornography is a serious addiction. It becomes an addiction that's every bit as difficult as drugs. And that's a whole different issue, is how to deal with addictions, because that's a challenge for those who are addicted. It's a sad, sad world for them. Any other questions?
Question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Why is Arizona's incarceration rate so much higher than states of similar population?
Well, part of it is our sentencing. For example, in Washington, California, and Indiana, possession of child pornography is a misdemeanor. And so I have an article here about a gentleman in Indiana who was a Boy Scout leader, and he was given 6 months jail and fined something like $10,000, and he has to do hundreds of hours of community service. So he goes to Indiana for 6 months in prison. In our state, we have numerous people who are basically serving life sentences for the same crime. So he would get out in 6 months, our people stay there. So some of it has, and in my mind, child possession is the most egregious mistake in the criminal justice system. If you're in, like I say, Washington State, it's a misdemeanor. You have numerous other crimes like that. And then someone has decided how long to serve. Well, I don't know how long it would take you to repent of committing a crime. It wouldn't take me more than a day in jail. I don't want to be there, and most people don't. But they end up serving these long sentences. That's part of it. The other part is we have a very poor rate of recidivism. And there's a group called Primavera down in Tucson. They got a government grant. They worked with 700 prisoners for several years. Their recidivism rate was 13%, whereas I think our state is somewhere around 60%, right? Somewhere between 42 and 60. I've heard different numbers. Yes.
One thing you haven't mentioned is the 85% of sentence applicability.
What happened, the question is, what about the 85% applicability of a prison sentence? In 1994, first of all, there's 6 classes of felonies. Class 1 being murder, class 6 being possession of marijuana. When I was a public defender from 90 to 94, I would go to a client and say, okay, this is your plea agreement. If you accept this, you might get what's known as soft time. You get a day credit or 2 days credit for each day you serve in good behavior. You might get what's called hard time. You get 3 days credit for each 2 days you serve on good behavior, or you would get flat time, which is day for day. So we had those options. And a lot of people accepted their pleas because they said, oh, I'm going to get a year, but if I behave myself, I get out in 6 months. In 1994, the federal government enacted this truth in sentencing, where they offered money to the state to do away with the categories of soft and hard penalties and have everybody serve 85% of their term, of their sentence. Well, the legislature at that time, the federal government only required that be done on classes 1, 2, and 3 felonies. But our state legislature, in their wisdom at the time, said, we're just going to apply that across the board to all 6 classes of felonies. So everybody serves 85% of their time now. And if they're on good behavior, they can get out after 85%. If not, they have to serve the other 15%. Well, a lot of people don't want that tail, they call it. And they're just inclined to, I'm going to serve my full term so that I don't have to be reporting to somebody for a portion of the time when I get out. And of course, others want out right away, even if they're going to be supervised. So that 85% has increased the number of people we have incarcerated.
Judge Ash, we had some folks actually send in some questions in advance. So if we could address a couple of those. I want to give you one of the easy ones here. Incarceration in Arizona increases. What do you see as the way to decrease incarceration? I think you've dealt with some of that already with suggestions. Do you want to add anything else at this point?
I think I've covered it. The one thing I would really push is more judicial discretion and the Sentencing Advisory Committee, which would come up with some solutions that the legislators don't have time to find them on their own.
Okay. Here's a question, and I believe they are attending via live stream, so I also have some questions. I work overseeing a GED program at a local jail facility. I have some great conversations with the inmates there. I do agree that for them to get a GED would be a great start for those that do not have one. But there are also a number that need more life skills training as well. The current programs offered in this facility will seldom deter recidivism. The challenge, though, is far greater than the inmates, but their family struggle and employment once you have been released is hard to get, especially without basic skills. The question, how do we offer job skills to the inmates and help them find employment once released?
That is going to take, I believe, a change of leadership at the Department of Corrections. I think there are so many things that could be done. You may have seen the 60 Minutes on, I think it was the German prisons, and they've done one on the Norway prisons. They offer so much more, and we have the potential to do that. I had people retired people who would volunteer to go into the prison and teach whatever their profession was to the inmates. We just don't offer enough for them. We are not really rehabilitating them. If they are required to get counseling in prison, they only get it during the last 3 years of their incarceration. And then they come out, and there's all these professions, these, like I said, 27 that they're prohibited from getting involved in. But what I see as being necessary to happen in prison is for them to teach more life skills and maybe some classes on entrepreneurship, because that's something they could do, is get out and start their own little business and work at that. And teaching them life skills would be, and I see that even in my court, in the justice court, which, you know, we don't handle felonies there, but I see a number of people coming through just lacking basic life skills. Yes.
I'm teaching in a program right now that I know you're familiar with out at Perryville. And we have somewhere between 50 and 60 women, and they're craving. I mean, they're soaking it up. They want, it's leadership that we're teaching, and they want it. They want it. They're soaking it up. They want to read. They want to work. They want to do everything. And, you know, I think there's a stereotyping that is just so false about minimum security people.
You know, my experience, a lot of these inmates are not really malicious people. Some of them are not very bright, or some of them maybe can't control their temper or their number of things. But like I said earlier, when we take over their lives, to me that puts a responsibility on us as a society to take that time that they have and at least give them the option of learning things and developing. And there's so much we could do. I mean, you have DVDs, all these the great courses, you know. I mean, there's just so much that can be done. And there's still restrictions on religious instruction there. I know that there's some groups that have access there, but they just need to be exposed to a kind of lifestyle that they've never experienced before. And that's my experience too. They're hungry for information and for learning and to develop skills. And I don't care, at the prison, we used to have these farms there. And I asked Director Ryan, why did they do that? And he says, well, they were losing propositions. But you know, nothing. I mean, you may have seen these programs where inmates are given animals to take care of, horses and dogs and so forth. It's a change of life for them. You know, they have somebody that cares back for them, and the dog's a pretty good friend. But farming or just growing gardens, it shouldn't be about the money and whether we can sell that stuff or not, or use it in the prison. It should be about rehabilitating the inmates and giving them something to do with their time that gives them a feeling of having accomplished something, having worked.
What % of people in Arizona prisons work? Do you have a number for that?
I'm not sure I have access to. I don't have it off the top of my head. It's a very low percentage, though. I can tell you that. They have, you know, there's several prison businesses. I know there's a bakery, there's a refurbishing furniture business, but there's so much more that could be done. And in my opinion, it shouldn't just be about the money. I mean, that's always a concern, but if we change some of our laws and gave them more instruction and opportunity in prison, it would reduce the recidivism rate that we have.
You know, one thing that you can do, you can call your state legislature right now. In the budget, they have got 20 positions for firefighters, folks that are being trained, they do on-site training in prison right now. That right now it's budgeted, I believe it's just annual though. I don't think it's holding year to year. But call your legislator and tell them keep that in there.
And there is a bill in the legislature now for qualified applicants to get a provisional license for barbers or manicurists or something like that, so that we're watching to see if it might pass.
Has that been through committee yet?
It's moving on to the Senate,
Okay.
House Bill 2290.
Okay, good. That's good to hear. I hope it gets through. We should do that.
We had a comment from an online participant who's done prison ministry, mentioning about the contrast between the state-owned facilities and the private ones. Mm-hmm. And one difference that was noted was that The private ones sometimes are newer and cleaner, and sometimes the inmates prefer those because of that, because it's a nicer facility or something.
Well, and also you're there with those who are minimum security. The classification gives you a better population to socialize with than if you get down to the real serious offenders.
Yeah.
So
They were also questioning whether maybe some weren't medium as well, maybe minimum and medium.
yeah, there are different classifications, and it's not just medium, minimum, medium, and maximum. There's another way to classify it, and I don't remember what it is, but there are some mediums there as well in private prisons.
Paul, how do you think decriminalization of like marijuana or kind of minor drug offenses would affect our prison population?
Well, it would certainly reduce it. Whether or not we should do that is a debate we should have. When I was in the legislature, I used to send out surveys to my constituents that would give them, and that was one of the questions I asked them, should marijuana be decriminalized? And it was about 50-50 among my constituents. So, that, even if you keep it criminalized, the only answer doesn't need to be incarceration. I mean, in our court, we require people who can't afford a fine. I require them to do some home study courses. There's a company called Wise Choice Alternatives that has created workbooks that they can order. They do them at home. They send it back to the company. The company grades them and confirm. Well, they don't really grade them. They just make sure that people have read it through and answered all the questions, because you have to fill out your answers. Then they send it back and confirm to the court that they've completed that course. There's courses on substance abuse and driving, driver responsibility, and various parenting classes and so forth. And I think that's a good, because a lot of the kids who come back, and if they're charged with minor consuming alcohol, I generally I give them a choice of a $500 fine. I just make it real high so that they'll do the course, or taking this course on substance abuse, because that costs $70. Well, they always choose that course. But they come back to me and say, I really learned something about that. I learned my personal responsibility and what's going to happen if I keep doing this. And so, to me, I think Sue Ellen Allen always says education is the best form of crime prevention. And it really is. I believe that. Yes, sir.
Yeah. The career I was in, for about 12 years, I was deputy director of the Oklahoma State Department of Mental Health Department as deputy director for program development. We were asked by the corrections department to provide them some information on the feasibility and advisability of setting up a forensic unit to deal with the mentally ill. And it turned out that we thought about 20% of the population were at the point of mental illness where they would benefit from them. But during that period of time, we had to do a whole bunch of psych evaluations, and I probably did 1,000 psych evaluations in that period of time. And, I didn't keep records, but I felt like at least 50% of those people, while they were criminally guilty, neither they nor society would benefit from their incarceration. That the whole thing to me became a gigantic waste of money. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly what the alternative would be, but they were guilty of their crimes. Most of them would readily admit it to me. There was no point in, but their social psycho background was so warped and out of the ordinary. Their education, their social interaction, the whole thing, that they weren't going to benefit from being in prison, and society wasn't going to benefit from them being in prison.
Well, the mentally ill is a whole nother issue. Our prisons have become the repository of the mentally ill. And a great percentage of the inmates in there have those issues. And I think years ago, when I was a kid, we called them insane asylums, but there were these asylums that housed the mentally ill. And at some point, we started doing away with those and putting them in prison. And it does them no good, and it endangers the other inmates. And I don't know, and that's another area where I don't think cost should be the sole determinant of what to do with these people. We have a responsibility for them. And I always think, I always wonder, how would Jesus define, or what would he do in this for these people? Both the criminals and there's a lot of the people that I talk to, inmates or people from other jurisdictions and inmates, would say the same thing. About 20% of the people should never be in prison. About 20% of the people should never get out of prison. And the other 60%, it depends on what we do with them when they're there. We could do so much more with them, and we would reduce that recidivism rate if we did. And I think that's been proven in other states.
I'm sorry, folks. We have hit our time limit tonight. I'm going to throw one more question in, and I'm going to answer it so you don't have to do this. We had a question, why won't Arizona Department of Correction allow Kairos into prisons? And the answer is they now do.
Good.
Okay, Kairos is now in Perryville. Is that correct, Dennis?
That's correct.
And this was a letter of a memorandum of understanding between Kairos of Arizona and the Arizona Department of Corrections. So for those of you who don't know what Kairos is, look it up. But it's our Christian reach into the prison of visiting the prisoners and offering them some of what we're talking about. Okay, that structure of spirituality. I'm not going to use the word religion. It's spirituality that they are seeking. And with that, I'm sorry. We've used up our hour and a half. But this is just our first conversation. We're going to have another one of these March 28th, 1 month from today. Yes, ma'am.
And we'll have one March 4th this coming Saturday at Central United Methodist Church, sponsored by the United Methodist Women's local unit there from 10 to 12. And we will be talking about incarceration in Arizona and its impact on women and families.
Outstanding. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Good, going on.
Judge, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean.
Now, those of you, please be watching the conference website, because that's where the additional information on the next conversation will be. And it's going to be held in this same format, where we could be on site here, and we will be doing a internet presentation to the folks that are really, we have a large geographic area that we cover, and allows people from Patagonia and Flagstaff and Tucson to participate with us. So again, thank you for your presence, and for you guys online, thank you for your presence as well.
And like prison reform, or mailing list for next steps. Please email Billy Fidlin at pscumc.org. B. Fidlin, sorry, at pscumc.
And with that,
Or one more.
I was supposed to do one more thing, and I forgot what it was. So with that, I'm going to let you guys go, and thank you again for your presence and for your input. Yeah, okay.
One quick one. Church and all our work with VIP also have some justice reform work